There comes a moment in some relationships that nobody talks about enough. It is not necessarily the dramatic confrontation. It is not the slammed door, the final argument, the long message, or the moment someone announces, "I'm done." Sometimes the real breaking point is much quieter. It is the moment when the person who spent months or years trying to make the relationship work finally becomes emotionally unavailable to the chaos. They stop explaining. They stop defending themselves. They stop trying to prove that their intentions were good. They stop waiting for the apology. They stop checking the phone. They stop wondering what the other person is thinking. And suddenly, the relationship that once occupied so much emotional space begins to lose its power. If you have experienced narcissistic abuse or a relationship characterized by strong narcissistic traits, you may know exactly what this feels like. You may have spent an extraordinary amount of energy trying to understand contradictions that never seem to make sense. How could someone tell you that you were everything they ever wanted and then treat you as though you were disposable? How could someone demand loyalty while repeatedly violating your trust? How could someone become affectionate when they feared losing you and cold when they felt secure that you would stay? How could the same person who once made you feel uniquely shown eventually make you question whether you were ever worthy of love? And perhaps the question that still follows you is this: what happens when they finally realize they destroyed something real? That question is understandable. It comes from the part of you that wants the story to make sense. You may want to know whether they ever recognized the value of what they lost. You may wonder whether the silence bothers them. You may wonder whether they compare new people to you. You may wonder whether, somewhere beneath the defensiveness, blame, arrogance, or emotional distance, they know that they pushed away someone who genuinely loved them. And there is something important I want you to understand. It is possible that a person with pronounced narcissistic traits experiences regret, shame, loneliness, anger, or distress after losing an important relationship. But you cannot build your healing around the assumption that they will experience those emotions in the way you imagine. People differ. Narcissism exists on a spectrum. Not every person with narcissistic traits behaves the same way, and not every difficult or abusive person has narcissistic personality disorder. So this conversation is not about pretending that we can read someone's mind. It is about understanding patterns. It is about understanding what can happen when a person repeatedly receives genuine love, but responds to vulnerability with control, entitlement, defensiveness, manipulation, emotional withdrawal, or devaluation. And, more importantly, it is about what happens to you when you finally stop participating in that pattern, because perhaps the greatest realization is not theirs. Perhaps the greatest realization is yours. Maybe one day you look back and realize, I was not asking for too much. I was asking the wrong person for something they were unwilling or unable to consistently provide. Maybe you realize that the relationship did not fail because you were not loving enough. Maybe you realize that your patience was not the problem. Your empathy was not the problem. Your loyalty was not the problem. Your desire to communicate was not the problem. Your willingness to forgive was not the problem. The problem may have been that you kept trying to use healthy relationship tools inside an unhealthy relational system. You were bringing communication to a dynamic organized around defensiveness. You were bringing vulnerability to a dynamic organized around control. You were bringing accountability to a dynamic where blame was repeatedly redirected toward you. You were bringing consistency to someone who may have been operating through unpredictability. You were bringing love to a place where love may have been treated less like a mutual bond and more like a source of validation. Eventually, and something inside you began to change. Maybe you did not notice it at first. Maybe you simply became tired, not angry, not vengeful, just tired. Tired of explaining the same hurt. Tired of having conversations that somehow ended with you apologizing for being hurt. Tired of wondering which version of the person you would meet today. Tired of being affectionate and receiving coldness. Tired of setting a boundary and watching it become an argument. Tired of being told that you were too sensitive when your feelings were dismissed. Tired of being accused of causing problems when you were simply asking for basic respect. Tired of the emotional whiplash. And that exhaustion can become an important turning point, because there is a difference between giving up on love and giving up on a relationship that repeatedly harms you. You may have thought that leaving meant you were failing, but sometimes leaving is the first time you stop failing yourself. Sometimes walking away is not a rejection of love. It is a rejection of the idea that love requires you to abandon your own identity. You were not created to spend your entire life proving that you deserve basic kindness. You were not meant to negotiate for respect. You were not meant to earn emotional safety through endless patience. You were not supposed to become smaller so someone else could remain comfortable. And this is where the psychology becomes important. A relationship involving strong narcissistic traits can sometimes operate through a cycle of idealization and devaluation. In the beginning, there may be intense attention, admiration, emotional intensity, rapid closeness, and the feeling that you have finally found someone who sees you completely. That intensity can feel extraordinary. But intensity is not always intimacy. Someone can make you feel deeply desired without actually being capable of maintaining the mutuality that healthy intimacy requires. Healthy intimacy requires two people who can tolerate vulnerability. It requires accountability. It requires repair after conflict. It requires the ability to hear, "That hurt me," without immediately turning the conversation into, "Well, you hurt me too." It requires the ability to say, "I was wrong," without experiencing accountability as humiliation. It requires enough emotional stability to recognize that another person's disappointment does not automatically mean you are being attacked. For someone with strong narcissistic defenses, these experiences may be difficult. Why? Because beneath narcissistic behavior, there can sometimes be profound insecurity, shame, fragile self-esteem, or a deeply defended sense of self. And when that internal structure is threatened, the person may protect themselves through denial, projection, blame, rage, withdrawal, contempt, or other defensive behaviors. That does not excuse abusive behavior. Understanding is not excusing. A psychological explanation is not moral permission. You can understand why someone behaves destructively and still decide that you will not remain available for it. In fact, that distinction may be one of the most liberating lessons in your healing. You do not have to hate someone to leave them. You do not have to prove that they are evil. You do not have to diagnose them. You do not have to convince everyone around you. You do not have to create a courtroom in your mind where you present evidence every night before you allow yourself to sleep. You can simply say, "This relationship is harming me, and I am allowed to step away." That sentence can change your life, because one of the hidden effects of emotional manipulation is that it can train you to believe you need permission to trust your own experience. You may begin questioning your memory. You may replay conversations. You may analyze tone. You may wonder whether you were too demanding. You may wonder whether you should have been more patient. You may wonder whether you caused the distance. You may wonder whether the relationship could have survived if you had communicated differently, and there is nothing wrong with healthy self-reflection. But self-reflection becomes harmful when it becomes self-erasure. You cannot take responsibility for behavior you did not create. You cannot carry another person's unwillingness to communicate. You cannot repair a relationship by yourself. You cannot love someone into accountability. You cannot be perfect enough to guarantee that another person will treat you well. Ride that again internally. You cannot be perfect enough to guarantee that another person will treat you well. The right relationship does not require perfection to maintain basic dignity. Now, perhaps the most painful part of leaving a narcissistic dynamic is that you may still love the person. This is where people misunderstand survivors. They say, if they hurt you so badly, why do you miss them? Because the heart does not operate like a courtroom. You can know something was as unhealthy and still miss it. You can understand the pattern and still feel attached. You can remember the cruelty and still remember the tenderness. You can know you should leave and still wish they would change. You can be angry and still love them. You can forgive someone internally and still never allow them access to you again. Healing is not the absence of complicated emotions. Healing is learning not to let complicated emotions make your decisions for you. There may be days when you feel powerful. There may be days when you feel weak. There may be mornings when you wake up and feel completely free, and there may be nights when you suddenly remember a conversation and wonder whether you made the right decision. That does not mean you are going backward, it means you are human. Your brain may have become accustomed to the emotional rhythm of the relationship. If affection and rejection were unpredictable, your nervous system may have become highly attentive to small signals. A message could change your entire mood. A delayed response could trigger anxiety. A loving gesture could restore hope. A cold interaction could create panic. An apology could make you believe everything was finally going to change. Then the cycle would begin again. That unpredictability can create a powerful attachment. This is one reason why leaving can feel strangely similar to withdrawal. You are not necessarily longing for mistreatment. You may be longing for relief. You may be longing for the version of the relationship you believed was possible. You may be longing for the beginning. You may be longing for the person you thought they could become. You may be longing for closure. And sometimes closure is the hardest thing to accept because you keep waiting for the person who hurt you to provide the explanation that will finally heal you. But what if closure does not come from them? What if closure comes from your willingness to stop asking the same question? What if closure is not, why did you do this to me? What if closure becomes, I now understand enough about the pattern to know that I cannot continue living inside it? That is powerful because the moment you stop needing their explanation, you begin reclaiming your psychological freedom. Maybe they say you were the problem. Maybe they say you misunderstood them. Maybe they say you were too emotional. Maybe they say you abandoned them. Maybe they tell mutual friends a completely different version. Maybe they move on quickly. Maybe they appear happier than ever. Maybe they post photographs that make it look as though nothing happened. Maybe they immediately find someone else. And this can be incredibly painful because part of you may think, how can they look fine after everything? But appearances are not psychological transparency. You do not know what another person feels internally. And you do not need to know. Their social media is not your psychological laboratory. Their new relationship is not a verdict on your worth. Their silence is not proof that you meant nothing. Their anger is not proof that you were wrong. Their ability to move quickly is not proof that they loved more deeply. And their potential regret, if it ever occurs, is not the reward for your suffering. This is where your healing becomes more mature. You stop measuring your recovery by their reaction. You stop asking, did I make them regret it? And you start asking, am I becoming myself again? That is the question. Am I sleeping better? Am I thinking more clearly? Am I laughing again? Am I making decisions without fear? Am I comfortable saying no? Am I trusting my intuition again? Am I reconnecting with people who genuinely care about me? Am I becoming curious about my future? Am I discovering who I was before I became consumed with someone else's emotional instability? That is healing. And if the person eventually realizes they destroyed something valuable, that realization belongs to them. You do not need to supervise it. You do not need to wait outside their emotional house, hoping someone turns on the lights. You have your own house to rebuild. There is another difficult truth. Sometimes people regret losing access to you without regretting how they treated you. Those are not the same thing. A person may miss your attention, they may miss your availability, they may miss your emotional labor. They may miss the admiration you provided. They may miss the stability you created. They may miss having someone who was willing to forgive them repeatedly. That does not automatically mean they understand the emotional consequences of their behavior. And this is why you should be careful with the fantasy of the narcissist finally realizing what they lost. It can become another form of attachment. You leave physically but remain emotionally stationed at the window, waiting for their regret. You stop speaking to them but continue having conversations with them in your head. You block the number but keep checking whether they tried to contact you. You say you do not care, but every new piece of information about them affects your mood. That is not freedom yet. That is distance with emotional surveillance. Real freedom comes later. It comes when their life becomes information you no longer need. When you stop searching, when you stop checking, when you stop asking mutual friends, when you stop analyzing whether their new partner is receiving better treatment, when you stop wondering whether they will come back. And eventually, perhaps, you realize something profound. Even if they came back, you would not want the old relationship because you have changed, your standards have changed, your understanding has changed. Your relationship with yourself has changed. You now recognize things you once rationalized. You now notice red flags you once explained away. You now understand that chemistry without safety is not enough. You understand that attraction without respect is not enough. You understand that apologies without behavioral change are not enough. You understand that promises without consistency are not enough. You understand that love without accountability can become destructive, and that understanding becomes your protection. This is why boundaries matter. A boundary is not a threat. A boundary is not. If you do this, I will make you suffer. A boundary is, if this behavior continues, I will choose what I need to do to protect myself. That distinction is enormous. You are not controlling the other person. You are controlling your participation. You cannot force them to stop insulting you, but you can end the conversation. You cannot force them to respect your privacy, but you can limit what you share. You cannot force them to communicate honestly, but you can refuse to participate in conversations built around manipulation. You cannot force them to become accountable, but you can stop rescuing them from the consequences of their behavior. This is what emotional detachment looks like. It is not hatred. It is not coldness. It is not becoming narcissistic yourself. It is not pretending that you never cared. Emotional detachment is the ability to care about your own well-being enough that another person's emotional reaction no longer controls your decisions. And perhaps you need to hear this today. You are allowed to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You are allowed to become unavailable to someone who only valued you when you were available. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You are allowed to leave conversations that repeatedly become abusive. You are allowed to protect your privacy. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to stop giving second, third, fourth, and 20th chances. You are allowed to choose peace without proving that you deserve it. And if you are currently in no contact, understand something important. No contact is not a psychological weapon. It is not a strategy designed to make another person panic. It is not a game of who can remain silent longer. It is not a performance. It is a protective boundary. And if contact is unavoidable because of children, work, legal matters, family obligations, or other circumstances, the principle can become low conflict, structured communication rather than emotional engagement. You do not need to turn every interaction into a referendum on the past. You can communicate only what is necessary. You can keep records when appropriate. You can avoid unnecessary arguments. You can refuse bait. You can stop defending your character to someone who repeatedly misrepresents it. Because manipulation often requires participation, a provocation may be sent because the sender expects an emotional response. An accusation may be made because the sender expects you to defend yourself. A sudden compliment may be offered because the sender expects you to reopen the door. A crisis may be presented because the sender knows you have historically rescued them. A nostalgic message may appear because the sender remembers that memories can weaken boundaries. But you do not have to respond to every emotional invitation. Silence can sometimes be a boundary. Distance can sometimes be a form of self-respect, and consistency is often more powerful than explanation. Think about the person you were before this relationship. Maybe you were confident. Maybe you were spontaneous. Maybe you trusted people easily. Maybe you laughed without analyzing every interaction. Maybe you had dreams that had nothing to do with relationships. Maybe you had hobbies. Maybe you had friendships. Maybe you had a sense of direction. And then slowly the relationship became the center of your emotional universe. You began monitoring their moods. You became an expert at detecting changes in tone. You learned what subjects would cause conflict. You learned when to speak and when to remain silent. You learned how to phrase ordinary requests so they would not be interpreted as criticism. You began walking on emotional eggshells, and eventually you might have looked at yourself and wondered, who am I becoming? That question matters, because narcissistic abuse can distort your sense of self, not because you are weak, but because prolonged emotional instability can make anyone hypervigilant. When you repeatedly experience unpredictable responses, your attention naturally becomes focused on threat detection. You become less interested in living and more interested in preventing the next emotional explosion. You become a manager of someone else's moods, and that is exhausting. Your healing requires you to resign from that position. You are not their emotional employee. You are not responsible for keeping another adult permanently comfortable. You are not required to sacrifice your truth to prevent someone else's anger. You are not responsible for regulating someone's self-esteem. You are responsible for your own choices. And perhaps the most beautiful part of healing is discovering that you can survive someone else's disappointment. You can survive being misunderstood. You can survive someone calling you selfish because you finally said no. You can survive someone saying you have changed. Maybe you have changed. Maybe you have become more discerning. Maybe you have become more protective of your time. Maybe you have learned that kindness without boundaries can attract people who take advantage of it. Maybe you have learned that empathy needs discernment. Maybe you have learned that forgiveness does not require access. Maybe you have learned that love does not require proximity. Maybe you have learned that you can wish someone well from very far away. That is not bitterness. That is maturity. And now we return to the title, The Narcissist's Breaking Point. What if the breaking point is not the moment they finally admit, I destroyed real love? What if the deeper breaking point is the moment the old relational system stops working? The moment your old role disappears, the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop arguing, the moment you stop proving, the moment you stop rescuing, the moment you stop accepting crumbs because you remember what nourishment feels like. That change can be profound. Because someone who has become accustomed to your availability may notice when that availability disappears. Someone who expected you to return may notice when you do not. Someone who assumed you would always explain yourself may encounter silence. Someone who relied on your forgiveness may discover that forgiveness does not automatically restore access. Again, this does not mean they will respond in one predictable way. They may become angry. They may attempt reconciliation. They may deny the problem. They may blame you. They may move on. They may appear unaffected. They may experience private distress. They may never acknowledge the damage. You cannot know. And you do not need to know. Your responsibility is not to predict their response. Your responsibility is to protect your future, because there is a dangerous trap in healing from narcissistic abuse. The trap is turning your recovery into another way of staying connected to them. You watch videos about narcissists every day. You analyze their psychology. You study their behavior. You research whether they miss you. You search for signs of regret. You analyze their social media. You ask whether their new relationship will fail. And suddenly, the person who is no longer physically in your life remains psychologically present every hour. At some point, healing requires you to shift the subject from them to you, from their psychology to your psychology, from what they might feel to what you feel, from what they might do to what you will do, from whether they regret losing you to whether you regret abandoning yourself for so long. And please do not use that last question to shame yourself. You survived with the tools you had. You loved according to what you believed. You hoped because hope is human. You stayed because you saw potential. You forgave because you had compassion. You tried because the relationship mattered. There is no need to punish the version of yourself who did not yet know what you know now. Instead, thank that version of yourself. That person carried you here. And now you can teach yourself something new. You can teach yourself that discomfort does not mean danger. You can teach yourself that silence does not mean rejection. You can teach yourself that someone else's anger does not mean you did something wrong. You can teach yourself that a boundary can survive someone else's disapproval. You can teach yourself that loneliness is temporary, but self-abandonment can become a lifestyle. You can teach yourself to pause before responding. You can teach yourself to ask, do I actually want this? Or am I afraid of their reaction? That question alone can reveal so much. How many decisions did you make because you wanted them? How many did you make because you wanted to prevent conflict? How many times did you say yes while your entire body was saying no? How many times did you apologize simply because you wanted the tension to end? How many times did you minimize your own pain because someone else was uncomfortable hearing about it? This is where self-respect begins. Not with becoming hard, not with becoming cruel, not with refusing to trust anyone ever again. Self-respect begins with listening to yourself. Your emotions are not always perfect instructions, but they are information. Your discomfort is information. Exhaustion is information. Your recurring anxiety around a person is information. Your need to constantly monitor someone's mood is information. Your inability to speak freely is information. Your fear of setting ordinary boundaries is information. Do not ignore the information, and as you heal, you may notice that you no longer crave dramatic closure. You begin craving peace. You no longer want them to confess everything. You want your mind back. You no longer want them to understand your pain. You want your nervous system to relax. You no longer want them to admit you were right. You want to stop needing to be right. You no longer want them to come back. You want to become someone who would not abandon themselves if they did. That is a different kind of strength, and perhaps someday you will hear their name and feel almost nothing. Not hatred, not excitement, not fear, just recognition. This was someone who played an important role in one chapter of my life. And then you continue. That is freedom, not forgetting. Not pretending, not rewriting history. Freedom. Because the goal of healing is not to erase what happened. The goal is to prevent what happened from determining who you become. You can turn pain into discernment. You can turn confusion into knowledge. You can turn betrayal into boundaries. You can turn loneliness into self-connection. You can turn the loss of a relationship into the recovery of your own identity. And there is something else I want you to remember. Real love was not wasted simply because it was given to someone who could not reciprocate it properly. Your capacity to love is still yours. Your tenderness is still yours. Your empathy is still yours. Your loyalty is still yours. Your ability to connect deeply is still yours. You do not have to become emotionally unavailable because someone misused your openness. You do not have to punish future people for what one person did. The lesson is not, never trust again. The lesson is, trust more slowly and observe more carefully. The lesson is not, never love deeply. The lesson is, love deeply without abandoning yourself. The lesson is not, never forgive. The lesson is, forgiveness does not erase boundaries. The lesson is not, everyone is dangerous. The lesson is, healthy people can handle reasonable boundaries. That last one is especially important. A healthy person may not always agree with you. They may become disappointed. They may make mistakes. They may have bad days. They may misunderstand you. Healthy relationships are not conflict-free. The difference is often what happens after conflict. Can the person listen? Can they reflect? Can they take responsibility? Can they repair? Can they change behavior? Can they tolerate your autonomy? Can they respect your no? Can they celebrate your individuality? Can they allow you to have a life outside of them? These questions matter more than intensity. Because intensity can be manufactured, consistency is harder to fake. Anyone can say, "You're the love of my life." Watch what happens when you disagree. Anyone can promise, "I'll never hurt you." Watch what happens when they are angry. Anyone can say, "I respect you." Watch what happens when you say no. Anyone can apologize. Watch what happens afterward. Behavior is where the relationship reveals itself. And this understanding can protect you from repeating the cycle. You no longer fall in love only with words. You observe patterns. You observe how someone treats people who cannot benefit them. You observe how they handle frustrations. You observe how they respond when they are wrong. You observe their raza dashti. You observe whether their kindness disappears when they do not get what they want. You observe whether they respect boundaries without retaliating. You observe whether they can celebrate your success without turning it into competition. You observe whether they can disagree without degrading you. This is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is one of the gifts that can emerge from surviving a relationship that forced you to examine human behavior deeply. But do not romanticize the pain. You did not need to be hurt to become wise. You deserved wisdom without trauma. Still, since the pain happened, you can decide that it will not be meaningless. You can use what you learned. You can protect yourself. You can help others. You can become more discerning. You can build relationships based on mutual respect. You can become the person who no longer confuses anxiety with chemistry. You can stop calling inconsistency mysterious. You can stop interpreting emotional unavailability as a challenge. You can stop believing that if you love harder, someone will finally become capable of loving you properly. And perhaps this is the ultimate answer to the question of whether they will ever realize what they destroyed. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will understand years from now. Maybe they will never understand. Maybe they will tell themselves a story that protects them from accountability. But your life cannot be placed on hold, waiting for another person's psychological development. Their awakening is not your assignment. Their healing is not your assignment. Their regret is not your assignment. Their new relationship is not your assignment. Their opinion of you is not your assignment. Your assignment is you. Your healing, your boundaries, your peace, your future, your relationship with yourself. And if you need to hear something today, hear this. You did not lose your worth because someone failed to recognize it. A diamond does not become worthless because someone mistakes it for glass. Your value does not fluctuate according to another person's capacity to appreciate you. If they could not value your loyalty, that does not mean your loyalty was worthless. If they rejected your vulnerability, that does not mean vulnerability was foolish. If they mocked your emotions, that does not mean your emotions were invalid. If they discarded you, that does not mean you were disposable. You are not defined by how someone treated you. You are defined by the person you choose to become after it. And perhaps this is your season of becoming. Becoming quieter, becoming wiser, becoming more selective, becoming more peaceful, becoming more honest with yourself, becoming less interested in proving, becoming less available to manipulation, becoming comfortable with disappointing people, becoming capable of walking away without needing the other person to understand why, becoming capable of loving without losing yourself. That is powerful. There will be moments when the old version of you wants to go back, when loneliness whispers, maybe it was not that bad, when nostalgia says, remember the good moments, when fear says, what if you never find someone else, when guilt says, maybe you should give them another chance, when curiosity says, maybe they have changed. Pause. You do not have to make a permanent decision based on a temporary emotional wave. Go back to the pattern. Remember what repeatedly happened. Remember how you felt. Remember what you had to become just to survive the relationship. And then ask yourself one question. If nothing changed, would I willingly choose this life again? That question can bring extraordinary clarity. Because sometimes we are not missing the relationship. We are missing the hope that the relationship would eventually become what we needed. And hope is beautiful. But hope without evidence can become a prison. Real change is demonstrated. It is not announced. It is not promised. It is not demanded from you. It appears through sustained behavior over time, and you are allowed to require evidence. You are allowed to say, "Wah, I need to see consistent change before I trust again." You are allowed to say, "An apology is not enough." You are allowed to say, "I am not comfortable reopening this relationship." You are allowed to choose no contact even if someone says you are cruel. You are allowed to choose limited contact even if someone wants unlimited access. You are allowed to protect yourself even when someone does not understand your reasons. And perhaps one of the most important things you can learn is this. A boundary does not need the other person's agreement to be real. You do not need them to say, "Yes, your boundary is reasonable." If you decide that you will not remain in conversations where you are insulted, that is enough. If you decide that you will not respond to manipulative messages, that is enough. If you decide that you will no longer share personal information with someone who repeatedly weaponizes it, that is enough. If you decide that your peace is more valuable than another round of explanations, that is enough. You are allowed to protect what you have rebuilt, because you have been rebuilding. Every day you chose not to check their page, you rebuilt something. Every time you resisted the urge to send the message, you rebuilt something. Every time you went to sleep without trying to solve the relationship in your head, you rebuilt something. Every time you said no without over-explaining, you rebuilt something. Every time you spent time with people who make you feel safe, you rebuilt something. Every time you laughed again, you rebuilt something. Every time you made a plan for the future that did not include them, you rebuilt something. Healing rarely announces itself. It happens quietly. One day you realize you went several hours without thinking about them. Then a day, then a week. Then you hear a song that once destroyed you and realize it no longer controls your emotions. You pass a familiar place and feel a memory without feeling compelled to return. You remember the relationship without wanting the relationship. That is when you know something has changed. You are not forgetting. You are integrating. The experience has become part of your history instead of the center of your identity. And perhaps that is the real breaking point. Not theirs, yours. The point where you finally break away from the belief that you must be chosen by someone who repeatedly failed to choose you with healthy behavior. The point where you stop auditioning for love. The point where you stop proving your innocence. The point where you stop begging someone to see what should have been obvious. The point where you say, "I see it now. I see the pattern. I see what it cost me. I see what I tolerated. I see why I stayed. I see why leaving hurt. And I also see why I cannot go back. That is not bitterness. That is clarity. And clarity is one of the greatest forms of protection. So if you are sitting somewhere today, wondering whether the person who hurt you will ever understand what they destroyed, gently release that question. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But you are beginning to understand what almost got destroyed in the process. Your confidence, your peace, your voice, your ability to trust yourself, your ability to dream, your ability to experience ordinary joy without anticipating punishment. And now you get to restore those things. You get to come home to yourself. You get to become someone you can trust. You get to stop abandoning yourself whenever another person becomes unhappy. You get to stop confusing compassion with obligation. You get to stop calling self-sacrifice love. You get to recognize that your life is bigger than one relationship. There are friendships you have not yet built, places you have not yet visited, skills you have not yet learned, dreams you have not yet pursued, people you have not yet met, versions of yourself you have not yet discovered. Do not spend the rest of your life standing at the door of a relationship that already taught you everything it could. Walk forward, not because they deserve to lose you, not because you need them to regret you, not because you want them to suffer. Walk forward because you deserve to live. You deserve mornings that begin without anxiety. You deserve conversations where you do not fear punishment for honesty. You deserve relationships where boundaries are respected. You deserve love that does not require constant self-erasure. You deserve friendships where your joy is celebrated. You deserve intimacy where vulnerability is not weaponized. You deserve peace. And if real love was destroyed in that relationship, let the lesson be bigger than the loss. Let it teach you that love is not enough without respect. Let it teach you that chemistry is not enough without safety. Let it teach you that apologies are not enough without change. Let it teach you that empathy is not enough without boundaries. Let it teach you that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. Let it teach you that leaving does not mean you failed. Sometimes, leaving means you finally understood the assignment. The assignment was never to convince someone of your worth. The assignment was to recognize it yourself. And when you finally do that, something extraordinary happens. You stop waiting for the narcissist to experience a breaking point. Because you have reached your own turning point, you stop asking, when will they realize? And you start saying, I realize now. I realize that I deserve consistency. I realize that I deserve respect. I realize that my feelings matter. I realize that my boundaries matter. I realize that I do not need to prove my pain. I realize that I cannot rescue someone from themselves. I realize that another person's inability to love me properly does not make me unlovable. I realize that I can grieve and still move forward. I realize that I can miss someone and still know they are not good for me. I realize that I can forgive and still maintain distance. I realize that I can love the person I once knew without returning to the relationship that harmed me. And most importantly, I realize that I am still here. That may be the sentence you need most. I am still here. After the confusion, I am still here. After the betrayal, I am still here. After the manipulation, I am still here. After the nights I spent questioning myself, I am still here. After the moments when I thought I would never feel normal again, I am still here. And I am not who I was. I am wiser. I am more discerning. I am learning. I am healing. I am rebuilding. I am becoming. So let them have their story. Let them have their version. Let them interpret the ending however they need to. You do not need to enter their narrative. You need to write yours. And your next chapter does not have to be about narcissists. It can be about you, your peace, your purpose, your friendships, your family, your work, your creativity, your body, your dreams, your laughter. Your future, the relationship that ended may have taken something from you, but it does not get to take everything from you. Do not give it that power. Take back your attention. Take back your mornings. Take back your evenings. Take back your decisions. Take back your voice. Take back your standards. Take back your ability to say no. Take back your ability to say yes without fear. Take back your identity. And when the past knocks again, remember that you are not obligated to open the door simply because someone knocks. You can acknowledge the memory without reopening the wound. You can wish someone well without walking back into the fire. You can love someone from a distance. You can grieve what you wanted without returning to what hurt you. And one day, perhaps you will understand that the greatest love story was never the one where someone finally realized what they lost. It was the one where you finally realized what you were worth. That is the story worth protecting. That is the story worth continuing. That is the story where the ending is not their regret. It is your freedom, and if you are still hurting today, do not demand that yourself become completely healed overnight. Healing is not a performance. You do not have to wake up tomorrow and feel nothing. You only need to keep choosing yourself, one boundary at a time, one day at a time, one honest decision at a time, one moment of self-respect at a time. There may be setbacks, there may be memories, there may be tears, there may be moments of doubt. Keep going, because the person you are becoming does not need to erase the person you were. That person deserves compassion too. You were trying to love, you were trying to understand. You were trying to make something meaningful survive, and now you are trying to survive yourself back into wholeness. Be gentle with that process. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too damaged to love again. You are not destined to repeat the same pattern. You are learning. And learning changes people. Your future relationships can be different because you are different. You can recognize manipulation sooner. You can walk away sooner. You can listen to your discomfort. You can value consistency over intensity. You can choose character over charm. You can choose accountability over promises. You can choose peace over emotional chaos. And you can love without disappearing. That is the real victory. Victory, not making someone regret you, not becoming unforgettable, not making them jealous, not proving that you were the best they ever had. Your victory is becoming someone who no longer needs their validation to feel valuable. Your victory is being able to look back and say, I loved sincerely, I learned deeply, I suffered honestly, I healed slowly, and I chose myself. That is enough. More than enough. So if someone destroyed real love through manipulation, neglect, entitlement, emotional abuse, or repeated refusal to take responsibility, let the consequences belong to them. You do not need to carry them. Let them carry whatever lessons their life eventually teaches them. You carry yours. Carry your wisdom. Carry your boundaries. Carry your compassion. Carry your strength. Carry your new understanding. And most importantly, carry yourself forward. Because your life is still happening, your story is not ending at the place where someone else failed to love you properly. Your story continues after them. And perhaps the most beautiful thing you will eventually discover is that the love you were desperately trying to receive from another person was never supposed to be the only source of love in your life. There is love in your friendships. There is love in your family. There is love in your purpose. There is love in your creativity. There is love in the quiet moments when you realize you can finally breathe. There is love in the person you are becoming, and there is a particular kind of peace that arrives when you no longer need another person's regret to validate your pain. You know what happened. You know what it cost you. You know what you learned. And now you know where you are going. Forward, not backward, not toward revenge, not toward another argument, not toward another attempt to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. Forward toward clarity, toward self-respect, toward healthy relationships, toward boundaries, toward emotional freedom, toward yourself. And when you finally reach that place, you may look back and realize that the relationship did not destroy your capacity for real love. It taught you why real love must include respect. It taught you why real love must include accountability. It taught you why real love must include safety. It taught you why real love must include freedom. It taught you why real love cannot require one person to disappear so the other can feel powerful. Real love does not ask you to become smaller. Real love does not punish you for having needs. Real love does not require you to constantly prove loyalty. Real love does not make you afraid to speak. Real love allows two people to remain whole while building something together. And if that is what you want next, do not settle for less simply because you are lonely. Loneliness is uncomfortable, but loneliness can be a doorway. It can give you space to discover what you actually want. It can teach you to enjoy your own company. It can help you rebuild confidence. It can help you recognize the difference between being alone and being abandoned. You are not abandoned because one relationship ended. You are being invited into a new relationship with yourself, and that relationship matters because wherever you go with you, so make yourself a safe place to return to. Talk to yourself with compassion. Honor your limits. Keep your promises to yourself. Rest when you need rest. Seek professional support if the experience has left you struggling to function, feeling unsafe, or overwhelmed by trauma. Healing does not have to happen alone. There is strength in asking for help. There is strength in therapy. There is strength in community. There is strength in saying, I need support. You do not have to carry the entire experience in silence. And finally, remember this. If they ever realize that they destroyed real love, that realization belongs to their journey. If they never realize it, that does not diminish what you gave. Your love was real because you gave it sincerely. Your heart was real because you opened it. Your intentions were real because you tried. But now, your love needs a new destination. It needs to come back to you, not in a selfish way, in a healthy way. Give yourself the patience you gave them. Give yourself the forgiveness you gave them. Give yourself the understanding you gave them. Give yourself another chance, and let the person who once spent all their energy trying to save the relationship become the person who finally saves themselves, not from another person, from self-abandonment, from endless explaining, from waiting, from chasing, from proving, from tolerating what repeatedly wounded them. That is where your freedom begins. And one day, when you think about the person who once consumed your entire emotional world, you may realize that the most important thing they lost was not simply you. They lost access to the version of you who would tolerate everything just to keep the relationship alive. And you lost something too. You lost the illusion that you had to earn love through suffering. That is a loss worth celebrating, because now you know that love should not require you to disappear. You know that boundaries are not cruelty. You know that no contact is not revenge. You know that emotional detachment is not hatred. You know that healing is not forgetting. You know that forgiveness is not permission. You know that another person's inability to recognize your value cannot determine your value. And now, finally, you know something even more important. You are allowed to choose yourself, today, tomorrow, and every day after that. So let this be your turning point, not the day they regret losing you, not the day they come back, not the day they apologize, not the day they finally understand. Let today be the day you understand. You were worthy before they met you. You were worthy while they misunderstood you. You were worthy when they rejected you. You were worthy when they blamed you. You were worthy when you walked away. And you are worthy now. The relationship may be over. The chapter may be closed. The memories may remain. But your life is not over. Your capacity to love is not over. Your future is not over. Your peace is not over. Your story is not over. You are still here. And this time, you are walking forward with yourself. That is not the end of your story. That is the beginning of your freedom.